Australia owns 49 Abrams tanks. In 2025, they gave Ukraine all of them, every single one. Not a loan, not a lease, gone, handed to a regiment that had started life 3 years earlier as a group of volunteers ambushing Russian columns on dirt roads with drones and sheer nerve. By December, one of those Australian tanks was rolling through the rubble of Pokrovsk, covering a Ukrainian assault team's withdrawal under live fire. Russia's most expensive drone kill of that month cost less than a tank's fuel bill. That regiment is the 425th Skelia, and it does not lose gracefully. Yuri Harkavy did not start 2022 as a regiment commander. He started it as a man who looked at what Ukraine had available and decided to build something better. His call sign was Skala, the Rock. And when he formed his volunteer unit in the spring of 2022, its first recruits weren't polished soldiers. They were men with limited training who made up for it in sheer aggression. Harkavy's answer to that gap was drones and ambushes. Instead of standing his people in front of Russian armor, he sent them around it, hunting columns, feeding coordinates to artillery, picking the moment to strike, and then disappearing before the return fire arrived. By July 2022, the Skala Battalion was working directly with the 40th Artillery Brigade in Kharkiv Oblast, hammering Russian positions ahead of an offensive that Kiev hadn't yet announced publicly. When that offensive launched, the battalion was at the tip of the spear. On September 9, 2022, Skala soldiers were among the first Ukrainian troops to enter Izium, a city that Russia had spent months fortifying as a hub for its northern Donbas campaign, and they helped tear it back in a matter of days. After Izium, the requests kept coming. Bakhmut, where the grinding was so bad that units rotated through like shifts at a factory. Robotyne in the summer of 2023, where Ukrainian forces pushed through minefields dense enough to stop tanks cold. Oshertyne in the spring of 2024, where the line was already gone by the time Skala arrived. The regiment didn't get sent to these places because things were going well. In January 2025, the battalion became a regiment. That is not just a rank upgrade. A regiment scale force means organic artillery, a dedicated tank element, a training pipeline, and enough manpower to hold ground rather than just raid it. By that point, Skala had already accumulated more combined arms combat experience than most conventional brigades that have been active for years. The armored inventory tells its own story. T-80 tanks from earlier in the war, M113 armored personnel carriers, Bradley IFV's Leopard 1A5s, M1117 Guardian armored mobility vehicles. The first visually confirmed appearance of that platform in Ukrainian service came from a Skala column in March 2024. Then, in May 2025, Harkavy did something nobody in the Ukrainian military had done before. He stood up Ukraine's first motorcycle assault company. The idea came directly from watching Russian forces use the same approach to move through terrain where armored vehicles were death traps. Small, fast, hard to target with a drone. 2 soldiers on a motorcycle can cover ground that a BMP can't reach without getting spotted in 30 seconds. 2 days later, they reportedly crossed the border into Kursk Oblast on those bikes. Ukraine's military ombudsman probably didn't get a memo. Here is something that doesn't get enough attention in the coverage of Western military aid to Ukraine. Australia, a country with no direct border threat from Russia, no NATO obligation, and a military built primarily for a completely different strategic theater, decided to give Ukraine all 49 of its M1A1 Abrams main battle tanks. Not a partial donation, not a loan, all of them. Every vehicle that the Australian Army had operated across 2 armored regiments between 2007 and 2024. Most of those tanks arrived in Ukraine in July 2025. The final batch was delivered in August. The regiment that received them was the 425th Skelia. Now, an Australian M1A1 is not a frontline American export. The US sent Ukraine M1A1SAs, already a downgraded package stripped of sensitive depleted uranium armor. Australia's version had been upgraded to the MSA standard, better crew displays, improved electronics, and a survivability package the base M1A1 didn't have. It still runs on the same notoriously fuel-hungry gas gas turbine. In a war where logistics are already a nightmare, that part Russia was ready for. Everything Skelia added next, Russia wasn't ready for. When those vehicles arrived in Ukraine, Skelia's technical teams went to work immediately. The turret received additional passive armor slabs, Contact 1 explosive reactive armor blocks, a Soviet-era system that Ukraine has continued to use for its rugged effectiveness, were fitted to the upper front plate and the sides. Over the top of the entire vehicle went a frame of fishing nets, the Ukrainian improvised anti-drone canopy that has become as recognizable in this war as camouflage netting in any other. And then, inside the crew compartment, technicians replaced the English language control panel with a Ukrainian language interface. That last detail matters more than it sounds. Most Ukrainian tank crews don't speak English. Cutting out the translation step under fire reduces a trained crew's reaction time at the worst possible moment. Russia had spent 3 years learning to kill Western armor. Skelia spent 4 months making an Australian tank Russia had never seen before, unrecognizable to everything Russia had prepared for. Pokrovsk is a logistics node in Donetsk Oblast, whose fall would effectively split Ukraine's eastern defensive network. Russia has been pressing toward it since the summer of 2024 with relentless force. By late 2024, Russian infiltration teams had actually penetrated parts of the city itself. Not the outskirts, not the industrial zone, the city. Skelia was one of the units that cleared them out. In November 2025, regiment soldiers were filmed approaching the Pokrovsk City Council building, pushing Russian forces back from positions they had seized inside the urban core. Room by room, stairwell by stairwell, drones watching every alley and FPV operators from both sides hunting anything that moves. That is not a tank battle. It is not even an infantry battle in any traditional sense. It is a surveillance war fought in rubble. And Skelia had been training for exactly that since Bakhmut. The regiment's drone element had been particularly active throughout this period. In February 2026, Skelia's drone operators were publishing footage of FPV strikes on Russian infantry in the Pokrovsk direction. Not suppression, not warning shots. Deliberate, targeted kills on enemy personnel attempting to advance through positions the regiment was holding. The footage went public. It was not an accident. Publishing drone kill footage of Russian infantry is, in this war, basically a recruitment ad. Skelia apparently decided that was fine. March brought a different kind of mission. Near the settlement of Minkivka, on the road connecting Bakhmut to Sloviansk, a stretch of highway that both sides understood as strategically critical, Skelia units conducted clearing operations that reportedly removed a Russian blocking position, established new observation posts, and inflicted more than 40 confirmed Russian casualties. That was a field operation conducted under active drone threat, on a road where both sides knew the stakes of control. Minkivka is not a famous name. It will not appear in the history books. It is a stretch of road in eastern Ukraine that both armies wanted, and Skelia spent a week making sure Russia understood why that was a bad idea. On March 17, 2026, something happened that had nothing to do with tanks or drones or territorial control. 2 soldiers from the 30th Brigade had been encircled near Sloviansk for an entire year. 365 days holding their position, spending most of their time underground to avoid Russian artillery, unable to be reached by normal evacuation routes. Skelia's reconnaissance teams moved through enemy rear areas for 3 days and pulled them out. Both men survived. The Ukrainian military doesn't give medals for that. There's no territory gained, no line on a map moved. 2 men came home who weren't supposed to. That's the receipt. December 23rd, 2025. That is the date Skelia officially confirmed what many had suspected since the Australian tanks arrived. The M1A1 Abrams had entered active combat. The regiment released video. The mission was fire support for assault groups operating inside Pokrovsk. The tank moved to the front line, identified targets, and provided direct fire cover while infantry units worked through the rubble ahead of it. This was not the tank breakthrough role that M1 Abrams are designed for in US doctrine. The Abrams was being used as a heavily armored mobile fire platform, close enough to the fight to suppress Russian defensive positions in real time, far enough back to use its armor against the drone threat, and able to cover a withdrawal when the assault group needed to pull back under fire. The Australian Army trained for open desert warfare in the Middle East. Pokrovsk is not the Middle East. It is concrete, rubble, and fiber optic drones the size of a wine bottle. The first confirmed combat loss of an Australian-supplied Abrams came shortly afterward, during the larger December action near Pokrovsk. Open source analysis confirmed the loss of one tank and a BMP-1TS infantry fighting vehicle during an operation in the industrial zone on the northwestern outskirts of the city. One tank down, 48 left. The regiment filed no public complaints. This is where the story gets complicated. On the night of March 31st, 2026, the 425th Assault Regiment, supported by elements of the 155th Mechanized Brigade, launched a counterattack along Highway E50 toward Pokrovsk. The objective was the position in the fray area that Russian forces had seized and that Ukrainian command assessed as critical to the broader defense of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The column moved under fog cover. Russia's Rubicon drone unit was already waiting. Apparently, fog is not the countermeasure it used to be. What happened next depends on whose account you accept, and that ambiguity is itself part of the story. Russia's elite Rubicon drone unit released footage showing the destruction of a Ukrainian M1A1 Abrams tank, a BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle, and an M117 armored mobility vehicle. The vehicles were caught in what analysts described as a combination of mines, a roadside ditch, and concentrated FPV drone strikes. Russian sources claimed the assault column was detected before it reached its objective, and that Ukrainian personnel were killed in significant numbers. Skelia's response was immediate and pointed. The regiment confirmed it had conducted assault operations on March 31st to enter and consolidate a sector of Pokrovsk. It confirmed that 4 armored vehicles were struck by enemy drones near the objective. It stated 2 soldiers were killed in action near those vehicles. It described the Russian video as edited footage from different days and different sectors, not a direct record of the March 31st operation. According to the regiment, the assault force dismounted under fire, completed the assigned task, and was actively fighting for the objective when the statement was issued. The regiment called the counterattack successful. Defense Ministry advisor Serhiy Sternenko, one of Ukraine's most prominent military bloggers and a man with significant access to frontline information, saw the Russian footage and said something very different. He accused Skelia's leadership of sending troops into a mechanized column under conditions of total drone dominance, calling the result no better than Russian practices. He said he had reviewed footage showing Ukrainian soldiers' bodies at the site and declined to publish it. The 7th Rapid Reaction Corps, the formation nominally responsible for the Pokrovsk area, announced on April 2nd that higher command had opened a formal review. The above actions are being studied and investigated, the Corps wrote, adding a request that observers refrain from unprofessional assessments that might affect ongoing operations. When journalists asked the 7th Corps directly whether Skelia fell under their operational command at all, or whether the regiment answered directly to Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, who has a well-documented preference for aggressive assaults and direct management of tactical decisions, the Corps declined to answer. The open-source mapping project Deep State added its own note. Preliminary data suggested the Ukrainian column had not reached Pokrovsk at the time it was struck. That question had no public answer when this script was written. What is not disputed? An M1 Abrams donated by Australia, modified by Ukrainian technicians, armed and crewed by men from one of Ukraine's most battle-tested assault regiments, was destroyed by a fiber-optic FPV drone on a road in eastern Ukraine. A drone so cheap, it costs less than a tank's fuel for 1 day of operations. That is the specific, brutal arithmetic of this war in 2026. Skelia is Ukraine's firefighting force, deployed to the sectors where the front is breaking and conventional units cannot hold it. The bill for that comes comes due somewhere. In late 2025, it started arriving at the military ombudsman's office. It has absorbed more mobilized personnel than almost any other assault regiment in Ukraine's assault forces, because the demand for its kind of rapid, aggressive action never decreases. The first deputy military ombudsman confirmed in April 2026 that reports of beatings had been received. The regiment has been described in Ukrainian media as one of the largest violators of the rights of its own troops among the entire defense forces. Those allegations sit alongside the footage of soldiers rescuing encircled men after a year behind enemy lines. This is not a clean story. It never was. The regiment that Australia's tanks went to is not a prestige formation polished for Western press visits. It is a unit that has been running at full combat intensity for 4 years. It takes the losses, replaces them, integrates whatever arrives next, and sends it all back into the fight without ceremony. 49 tanks from a country that sent its entire armored fleet across the planet ended up with the regiment that Ukraine keeps deploying to the places where the war is being decided. Whatever the review of March 31st concludes, those tanks are still in Pokrovsk. Skelia is still in Pokrovsk, and Russia still hasn't taken it. Every unit Russia has committed to Pokrovsk, and it has committed a lot, has had to go through Skelia to get there. Most of them didn't get through. If you watch this channel because you want to understand how this war actually works, not the headlines, not the propaganda, the mechanics, then hit subscribe. Every video we make goes this deep. That's the deal.